With the number of lectures I've done, you would think I'd be able to finish a point from the previous lecture. A number of you left me messages with my secretary, asking him to remind me to finish the story about my husband. Sorry to leave you in suspense for over a week, but you'll be pleased to learn that once upon a time I was attempting to collect some bone marrow from the skeleton of a red dragon who had been killed some time ago by adventurers. Unbeknownst to me, another dragon had taken up residence in the same cavern, possibly to gloat, possibly thinking that lightning wouldn't strike twice. What is the safest place to set up a base after all? The base that's already been looted. Unless there were any research wizards nearby, research wizards get into everything. Anyway, my spell list was full of archaeological and botanical spells, the list for which I'll leave somewhere in case people are interested, but what it's not good for is battling dragons. Fortunately, I had a few force protection spells, but I wasn't going to survive. Did I die? Find out after the break. I didn't die, because I was rescued by a group of divine warriors who are nearby and had happened to learn by augury if it would be beneficial for them to attack the dragon. And one of the group was a half-orc paladin who I won't name, but whose last name I added to my own. I've been married to my paladin husband for several years now, and you'll be pleased to know, hopefully, that I sold the research table without ever using it. We're happy together, but my husband has a bit of a sore point. See, there's a certain sword that is zealously guarded by any divine order who is fortunate enough to own one. It has a long and sordid history. Sorry, I couldn't resist that one. It's one of the few weapons that isn't so much made with a certain profession in mind as it is transformed by one profession. I am talking naturally about the Holy Avenger, a sword that I previewed extensively in the previous lecture, and so I have no idea why I bothered to be coy in this introduction. The Holy Avenger sword has existed for as long as we have recorded history, always created for the paladin. It is technically unknown where the design for the Holy Sword came from, nor the more powerful Holy Avenger, though we can hazard some guesses because it's one of the few swords that becomes more powerful when paired with a paladin. Indeed, in the First Age, it is stated that any paladin of sufficient power who wields a holy sword unsheathed will project a circle of power in 5 feet around them, and that this power dispels magic at the level of the paladin or lower. When it's a Holy Avenger they wield, that dispelling aura extends to 25 feet, and the 5-foot aura becomes a magical resistance. Resistance in the oldest era was predictably more powerful than it is now. It was just a 50% chance that it wouldn't work. My theory on why it wasn't 100% is that the gods of that age still enjoyed the roles of fate and destiny in their plans. If a fireball hit their paladin, then it was always meant to be. If it didn't hit them, then it was through the beneficence of their deity. You see, all the praise and none of the responsibility. And I can say that without getting in trouble, because Lord Ao had to step in to change many things, including specifically that. Anyway, we have a sword whose properties were hidden and secret until unlocked by someone whose source of power came directly from the gods. We say we technically don't know who created the Holy Avenger, but we can guess, as they were only useful for paladins, and then, in that age, paladins could only be human. So I'm looking at you, human gods. My guess is Tyr, seeing as he's the quintessential god of law and justice, and also the most go-getter of my top 3. This is a sword that is proactive in its enchantments, as it must be brandished and used as a weapon, not hidden and used as a threat, nor shown and used as a promise. For a threat, I would have suggested the god of protectors, Hell. The swords were powerful, but stronger still were their rumoured abilities. Enemies would capitulate before a paladin if it was even suspected that they carried a holy sword, and some threats were ended by a particularly shiny scabbard. It'd be a bit like if I cut 7 notches into a wand and the orc necromancer surrendered because they thought I was carrying a rod of 7 parts. Ridiculous, but it sometimes works. An interesting idea for later perhaps, how to bedazzle your magical items. Anyway, the final suggestion I have is Ilmater. It may seem strange, and admittedly it's my weakest theory, but it occurred to me that he is the god of the suffering good people of the world, and the Holy Avenger radiates more than just magic and strength. It radiates hope. The image of the paladin with a golden holy blade catching the sunlight is one of our most powerful images, and of the one who will save us. Ilmater could have worked with the others to provide the symbol of hope for all who suffer, for all who need saving. So in the First Age, a Holy Avenger sword functioned as a mere magical sword. I'm going to use an odd turn of phrase, but bear in mind that tools and weapons and the like can have layers on them that better protect and strengthen them. It's the same for magic. We have level 3 spells, and level 4 spells are generally an order of magnitude more powerful. We also have levels of magical enchantment, and 2 layers of enchantment are generally stronger than 1. So when I say a +2 sword, I'm talking about the layers. So in the First Stage, a Holy Avenger sword, if picked up by any normal adventurer, would function as a +2 sword. But in the hands of a paladin, the internal power of the sword would be activated and maintained by the direct touch of the supernatural radiance of a paladin. It would be akin to a depleted wand coming into the aura of a mythalar. Its true purpose was powered, and the +2 sword became a +5 holy sword. Now, holy weapons existed by themselves, and no evil creature could touch them without being hurt by the censure of a god, but the holy property of an avenging weapon only activated when plugged into a paladin power source, and so there have been stories of these +2 swords being wrested from the cooling hand of a powerful hobgoblin war leader, only to have them flare into life and divulge their secrets. Because the Holy Avenger is hidden, it's always a miracle to find one, and because they camouflage so easily when a paladin falls, they're religiously guarded by those churches. So how did the structure of a Holy Avenger fare in future ages? Well, in the Second Age they were exactly the same. No surprise there, the Second Age was mostly just the First Age, but a bigger restriction on mortal magic. There were still terrible extant threats in the world, and they still needed the power of these weapons. But in the Third Age, and the amended Third Age, magic was understood to have functioned differently. Rather than mischances, spells were tailored in a slightly more complex way, such that powerful mages could instead pit their acumen against the spell resistance of their foes. Now, instead of a spell failing 50% of the time, it only failed if their caster didn't place enough force or conviction behind their effects. I think the protection stayed the same because the end result was still the same. The spell either worked or it didn't. Spell resistance more changed as casters started finding a way around it. A Holy Avenger still did extra damage to evil creatures and was a +2 longsword in the hands of a normal person. It still became a +5 Holy Avenger when held by a paladin, and the mischance was reclassified as Spell Resistance 15, which was a logarithmic scale devised by someone much smarter than I. Possibly Xanathar? It seems like their sort of specialty. The radius of the spell magic was smaller, only 5 foot, and it was no longer auto-magical. It had to be cast with intent by the wielder. As the Third Age carried on, at some point enough magical knowledge had been refined that people found better way to do things, and people reached a hemi-naissance. The design of the Holy Avenger improved by being more akin to the device powered by the Paladin, and a better material was discovered to be able to hold the enchantment. A 3.5 Age Holy Avenger started out as a depowered +2 cold iron sword, dealing extra damage to Fae and the like, and when held, still became a +5 cold iron Holy Avenger. This time, however, the spell resistance rose through a scale from a spell resistance 6, and following the power level of the Paladin, and everyone adjacent to them. The Dispel magic stayed the same, though it was reclassified as a Greater Dispel magic. What's interesting to me is, by this point elves and other races could also become paladins, and yet the Holy Avenger was crafted with cold iron, which seems offensive to me, and certainly harmful to some of those races that could become paladins now. Perhaps the designer wanted to limit the use of Holy Avengers, or perhaps even the elves, or especially the elves, understood that there were evil fae out there that needed to be done away with. It's in this age also that we had our first schematics for mortals creating Holy Avengers. One potential Holy Avenger was never listed as such, but the creator was a dwarf whose age made it possible that they could have been alive also in the Second Age. The sword was known as a legacy weapon, one that grew in power with the wielder. Durandana was a blade sacred to the faith of a sun god, forged by a dwarven weaponsmith to house the fingerbones of the legendary undead hunter, Saint Arden. Saint Arden, it's difficult to say, it's Ardtan, Arden, was slain defending a dwarven stronghold from a plague of vampires. In gratitude for his sacrifice, the dwarf Thane presented the church with this sword to honour the hero. When Arden was canonized several years later, the hilt of the sword was hollowed out to serve as a reliquary for the saint's fingerbones. The church kept Durandana in its securest vaults, allowing it to be used only by the holiest persons and only in times of dire need. Even though many of its wielders have died in battle, Durandana always finds its ways back into the hands of the church. Over time and devotion to the blade, you would gain many of the same abilities once afforded to paladins of old. Resistance to insidious magics that affected your body and mind, an enhanced ability to turn undead, a constant protection from evil spell, and an aura that allowed you to generate hallowed ground. In the Fourth Age, like everything else, the Holy Avenger changed drastically. First, it could be enchanted to any weapon on the axe, hammer, and heavy blade categories. Second, it dealt extra radiant damage only when radiant damage was part of the powers used. And when you got an especially good hit on, it allowed you to use some of your internal reservoir of healing and dealt extra radiant damage based on the +5 or +6, yes, +6 enchantment. As a daily power, you could give yourself and every ally within 50 feet of you a significant boost in their defenses against insidious magic, but only for around 6 to 10 seconds. The most important thing about the Fourth Age weapon was that it couldn't hide. It was always a Holy Avenger, regardless of who was using it. The philosophy for that, I think, is the same as last time. The world was a desperate and terrifying place, and no one had time to pick up a sword and wonder what secrets it held. Usually when you picked up a sword, you needed to know exactly what it did, because the next horde of monsters wasn't too far away. The other incredible thing was that you didn't have to be a paladin to use it. It functioned that way for everyone, even the bad people, though of course if your attacks didn't use radiant, then why would you bother? And perhaps it's that specificity that kept it in the hands of paladins. If you're a shadow mage, you're not going to waste your time with a radiant weapon. You have a job to do, a fight to win. People keep powerful swords that they don't use solely out of spite. People very quickly just going to become another statistic. In the Fifth Age, things have settled down again. I'm a professor, whereas in the previous age I think I would have been a war wizard. And there's been a rush towards traditionalism, a romanticizing of the Third Age, a theory that if we return to that age, we'll again evolve naturally towards whatever it was before it was all ruined by the spell plague. Which, again, actually did happen. A Fifth Age Holy Avenger also no longer hides its ability, which, can I just say, if this is a weapon for paladins, and the old codes of conduct forbade a paladin from lying or being false or whatever, why could the sword lie? Anyway, this sword radiates a +3 enchantment, the highest of our age, and deals extra radiant damage against fiends and undead. While a paladin holds a drawn sword that radiates a 10-foot aura that affects you and allies within it, giving you divine advantage on any insidious magic and magical effects. If a paladin of sufficient power were to hold it, that radius extends to 30 feet. It's good to see that the lessons of legacy weapons weren't completely lost. Coming up next, we're going to continue the Divine Lectures and talk about evil gods and their followers, including the Blackguard, Dreadguard, Death Knight, and Priest. Until then, to be continued.